For years, audiences have known him by one name, Tyrus. The towering commentator with the thunderous laugh, sharp wit, and unmistakable self-assurance who turned Fox News panels into unexpected bursts of humor and conviction. Viewers saw the headlines, the jokes, the viral clips, and thought they knew the man behind the microphone. But the public version of Tyrus has always been just that, public. The man underneath, the one who built himself from bruises, second chances, and quiet determination, rarely steps into the light. That's why one simple moment changed everything. Photographers caught him walking through downtown New York beside a woman most fans had never seen. No red carpet pose, no announcement, just an easy smile and a hand held with quiet certainty. The internet did what it always does, froze the image, zoomed in, and asked, "Who is she?" And maybe the bigger question, how did the loudest voice on late-night television end up in something so grounded, so still, so real? To understand the power of that moment, you have to pull the camera backward, way back, to the beginning. George Timothy Murdoch entered the world in Boston on a cold February day in 1973. His mother was only 15, his father barely 19. Between them, they had more fear than stability, and that fear quickly hardened into violence. Home wasn't a harbor, it was a battleground. When Tyrus was still small enough to look up at the world struck first. A blow from his father left one eye swollen for life, a scar that never quite vanished. His mother gathered what courage she could and fled, holding her children but not much else. They ran from danger, only to find another kind of rejection waiting. Her family offered her shelter, but not her children, because their father was black. The boys were sent to foster care, and that decision cracked something permanent inside the young Tyrus. He learned too early that love could be conditional and that belonging could vanish overnight. As a kid, he thought if he could just change how he looked, maybe he could change where he belonged. It was a heartbreaking thought for a child, to see skin as a barrier to home. Through shuffled addresses and new faces, he carried that wound quietly, hardening it into humor, masking it with bravado. When his mother finally reclaimed him, the reunion came with fresh instability. New towns, new schools, new men in and out of her life. One stepfather's temper left him without his front teeth before he even turned 13. By 16, the boy who would become Tyrus had decided that pain would not be his permanent address. He packed what little he owned into a black trash bag, the symbol of his escape, and walked out. For weeks, he slept anywhere that felt safer than the chaos he knew: locker rooms, friends' basements, even empty classrooms. Yet through all of it, one thing stayed consistent: football. On that field, the violence finally had rules, and effort meant something. The game gave him a map, and discipline drew the route. College followed, first Antelope Valley, then a scholarship offer at Nebraska, Kearney. He wasn't a glamorous recruit, but when he put on those pads, he became immovable. Teammates remember the laughter, coaches remember the work ethic, and he remembers something simpler: the first genuine mentors who taught that accountability builds character faster than applause ever could. His degree in physical education was more than paper, it was proof that staying the course could actually work. Even when money ran out, he kept pushing, balancing substitutes pay with bouncer shifts. Then came the night that shifted his orbit completely. Two drunk patrons started a fight at a Los Angeles club. Tyrus broke it up with calm authority, cracking jokes as he separated them. In the crowd that night was a professional wrestler who watched the whole thing with fascination. In that mixture of humor, control, and showmanship, he saw a performer ready for a ring. Within a few years, Murdoch was no longer a bodyguard or a bouncer, he was Brodus Clay, stepping beneath arena lights with the swagger of someone who'd finally found his stage. The choreography of wrestling suited him, physical storytelling mixed with theatrical confidence. Fans met the persona long before they ever met the man. To an audience, he was indestructible; to himself, he was simply employed, a welcome novelty. Success brought new names, new crowds, and eventually a new career pivot: televised commentary. What started as casual banter with Greg Gutfeld during online specials turned into a recurring seat on Fox News. Viewers found something magnetic in the contrast: a former wrestler turned political pundit, equal parts comedic timing and surprising insight. By 2016, Tyrus had become a familiar face, his television charisma solidified as part of American media's nightly rhythm, but fame, as ever, brings friction. In 2019, his name hit headlines again, this time not for entertainment or inspiration but for allegations and lawsuits that transformed his world into front-page drama. Laws were cited, statements issued, insiders speculated. Networks defended their processes, critics demanded explanations. For Tyrus, the whirlwind meant stepping into a storm where the truth and the headlines collided loudly. Through months of scrutiny, his image blurred between public curiosity and personal fatigue. He told friends that the trial by media cut deeper than any physical fight he'd ever taken. And yet, in the quiet spaces off camera, life was still moving forward. Waiting amid the flashing lights was someone who had stood beside him long before that chaos, a woman named Ingrid Rink Herbert. To most fans, her face was unfamiliar. To Tyrus, her presence had been constant for nearly a decade. They first crossed paths in 2014 in a moment so ordinary it almost vanished from memory, a coffee line, shared laughter about bad music blasting from a nearby shop, a number exchanged half-jokingly. Nothing planned, nothing staged. Over time, brunches turned into workouts, workouts into quiet weekends, and quiet weekends into an unspoken partnership. She wasn't chasing the spotlight, she was balancing clients as a personal trainer and building a small meal prep business. But what impressed him wasn't the hustle, it was the steadiness. For a man who had lived through so many sudden breaks, her calm became its own kind of miracle. When fans saw the recent photo of them walking hand in hand, that calm radiated. No entourage, no press release, just two people navigating traffic with matching strides. On social media, the response exploded, half disbelief, half admiration. Some were stunned to learn he was married at all, others couldn't believe how different she seemed from the glitzy expectation of a Fox News celebrity spouse. The truth was simpler, their relationship wasn't built for cameras. It was anchored on shared discipline, his from sport and survival, hers from years of coaching clients toward transformation. She had once lost more than 100 pounds through sheer persistence, a story of resilience that mirrored his own. Together, they discovered that endurance doesn't need an audience. That's why that single photograph struck such a chord. In a world obsessed with declaration, there's whispered. In a culture wired for spectacle, there's breathed. People didn't just see a couple, they saw proof that growth could lead somewhere gentle. For Tyrus, who had built his persona on strength and swagger, tenderness turned out to be the quietest kind of power. And for viewers used to punchlines, that glimpse of humanity was disarming. In the days after that photograph appeared, journalists scrambled to identify the woman whose quiet confidence shifted the narrative. Longtime fans called the pairing unexpected. Yet anyone who knew Tyrus personally said it made perfect sense. Ingrid's presence explained why the man once defined by confrontation now carried a calmer energy on screen. Away from studio lights, theirs was a household built on discipline, humor, and organized chaos. On any given morning in northern New Jersey, the Murdoch home hummed with both noise and intention. Ingrid's spreadsheets covered the counter, color-coded meal plans, training schedules, grocery lists annotated with motivational quotes. Between the clatter of blender lids and the occasional reptile tank buzzing in the next room, life happened in real time, messy, structured, human. Tyrus often jokes that he might still be sleeping in locker rooms if not for her organizational instincts. She turned the same tenacity that helped her lose 150 pounds into family strategy. When she talks about that transformation, she never romanticizes it. Change isn't cinematic, she's fond of saying. It's repetitive, mostly boring, and completely worth it. That plain-spoken realism resonates with him. After decades of performing strength, he finds comfort in someone who defines it differently. For Ingrid, strength is accountability, showing up, not showing off. That philosophy threads through their marriage, both are loud in public yet quietly methodical at home. While fans picture pundits and glitter, the Murdochs' favorite ritual is simpler, a slow breakfast and a debate about which kid forgot to feed which creature in what they affectionately call the Tyrus-Zilla Zoo. Yes, the zoo is real. It began as one fish tank and a passing curiosity. Now it's a full ecosystem: turtles, snakes, chameleons, exotic fish, even a rescued lizard named Tito who treats the kitchen windowsill like prime real estate. When Ingrid married into that scale-covered circus, she wasn't thrilled. She once confessed that reptiles made her shiver. But family, as she knew, rarely arrives pre-trained. So she treated it like any professional challenge: study the subject, create a routine, delegate wisely. Each child holds a role. Georgie, their daughter, handles bonding time, Rhett takes the heavy lifting, Julia keeps enclosures pristine. Ingrid supervises, coffee mug in hand, equal parts drill sergeant and nurturer. Tyrus often says the animals taught their household a kind of order therapy. Feeding schedules forced consistency, cleanup demanded teamwork, and watching fragile species thrive reminded him that care is a daily verb. Inside that microzoo, the larger metaphor of their life unfolds, a blended family thriving on structure after chaos. Ingrid brought her son Rhett into the marriage, while Tyrus has children from previous relationships. In another home, that mix might have sparked resentment. In theirs, it became curriculum. Being bound by duty rather than DNA turned into a lesson they repeat to fans who follow them online. Love isn't neat, but it's learnable. Instagram glimpses show just enough: Tyrus hulking near a terrarium, Ingrid laughing off camera, captions about teamwork that sound more like coaching than boasting. The internet eats it up, precisely because it feels unscripted, yet behind this ordinary domesticity sits an unspoken awareness of public scrutiny. Both know that one misquoted tweet can reignite old controversies. Despite settlement papers and official statements, the noise never fully disappears. In early 2023, bits of historical commentary suddenly resurfaced on blogs, framed without context. For a few sleepless nights, they scrolled through comment sections that blurred fact and fiction as if one social media repost could relitigate the past. Ingrid, the fitness coach who once measured progress by ounces and inches, measured this new turbulence differently, in heartbeats and exhalations. "You can't control the algorithm," she told him, "but we can control breakfast, we can control kindness." It became their impromptu mantra. Control had always been his survival mechanism, now he found a calmer version of it through her steady cadence. Observers noticed the shift. On Fox panels, the once confrontational flair gave way to more reflective quips, still witty, but tempered. When talk turned to redemption or second chances, his words carried weight that suggested experience rather than rhetoric. Viewers felt it even if they didn't know why. In private, he admitted that fatherhood in marriage softened the sharp edges fame had carved. "Everything I used to fight for," he once told a friend, "was about proving. Now it's about maintaining." Their shared mornings illustrate that change. He rises early, still built like the athlete he once was, performing quiet stretches on the porch. She joins him with coffee and a notebook, sketching meal ideas or writing affirmations for clients. Conversation drifts from global headlines to local gossip to which fence panel needs repainting. There's laughter more often than news analysis. Cameras might capture them leaving a city restaurant once or twice a year, but the real foundation is this: two people who know the cost of chaos choosing calm repeatedly despite the tranquility. Ambition hasn't faded. Ingrid's wellness company continues expanding. Her clients praise her no-excuse philosophy and her ability to make discipline feel compassionate. Meanwhile, Tyrus balances broadcasting with mentoring young athletes who remind him of himself, the tall kid with too much anger and too little direction. When he tells them that success is quieter than revenge, it sounds rehearsed, but it isn't. It's lived. That perspective infuses every story he tells on air, not a sermon, just a steady reminder that humor and humility can share the same sentence. As the couple settled into their New Jersey farm property, community became their next project. Neighbors recall that the Murdochs didn't introduce themselves with celebrity flourish. Instead, they passed out homemade energy bars during a volunteer cleanup. Small gestures built reputation the way repetition builds muscle. Over time, locals stopped whispering "that's the Fox News guy" and started calling them "those folks who fix fences and rescue turtles." In a media landscape obsessed with scandal, that ordinary kindness felt almost radical. When asked in a podcast interview about being labeled a power couple, Ingrid laughed. "Power's overrated," she said. "We're a logistics couple. He brings the story, I bring the schedule." The line went viral precisely because it sounded honest. It also revealed the secret of their endurance: complementary purpose. Tyrus built his career on commanding rooms, she built hers on structuring lives. Together, they created balance. Spotlight rhythm meets steady metronome. Every thriving partnership finds its harmony. Theirs just happens to play out before millions of watchful eyes. Still, both understand the fragility of narrative. One generation saw him as a football player, another as a wrestler, another as a political pundit. Now maybe this generation sees him as something else entirely: a man learning to be at ease. That's why the image of them walking hand in hand mattered. It reframed legacy. Not the athlete or the celebrity, but the survivor who finally stopped surviving long enough to simply live. Viewers scrolling through their feeds can debate ideology or television ratings all they want. What lingers is that unexpected tenderness in the photograph, proof that resilience sometimes looks like rest. The fascination around their union continues because it mirrors what many aspire to: a relationship that feels both hard-earned and natural. People project their own stories onto it. Redemption seekers see closure, romantics see destiny, skeptics see PR strategy. Tyrus and Ingrid, for their part, seem amused by the interpretations. They know that what defines them can't be captured by headlines or hashtags. It lives in repetition, the daily habits that turn chaotic histories into quiet partnerships. For a man who once built his persona inside televised clashes, the most radical move was creating a home that encourages peace. So when fans say they were stunned by seeing him with his famous wife, maybe what really surprised them wasn't the woman herself but the lesson implied. Strength doesn't always roar on command. Sometimes it speaks softly across a kitchen table, planning the day while the coffee cools and the reptiles blink in approval from their tanks. Every life that reaches the headlines eventually fades from them, but the measure of character often appears when the cameras are no longer there. For Tyrus and Ingrid Murdoch, the quiet seasons that followed the noisy ones became their best story yet. After nearly a decade together, they didn't host a lavish public ceremony. Instead, on a crisp January morning in 2024, they married in front of a small gathering on their property. No sponsorship deals, no television exclusives, just family, friends, and vows spoken with laughter between them. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes, the photographs remained timeless. Ingrid's dress was simple linen, pale green to match the emerald on her engagement ring. He wore a classic black suit that looked almost modest on a frame built for spectacle. A neighbor officiated. The only media coverage came later, when images surfaced online and once again startled those who couldn't place the softer version of the man they thought they knew. For most celebrity marriages, the intrigue ends after the vows. For them, it sparked genuine curiosity. What happens when two people who've already endured the hardest parts of life try to build something ordinary? The answer is in their daily repetition. Marriage didn't transform them into new people, it clarified how durable their existing values were. Discipline, humor, resilience, the same traits that carried him through locker rooms, wrestling rings, and studios now powered his approach to husbandhood. And the same compassion, patience, and pragmatic insight she applied to clients framed the way she handled public curiosity. When tabloid reporters called for interviews, they declined politely. Instead, they posted images of their new fence, sunrise workouts, homemade pizza nights. The message was consistent. Their privacy wasn't up for debate, but their happiness wasn't something they needed to hide either. The following spring offered literal new growth. They took over a small farm north of the city, a patch of land dotted with apple trees and old barns that creaked when the wind reminded them of age. Tyrus joked that buying acreage was the most conservative move he could ever make. Land doesn't cancel you. The humor hid sincerity, soil grounded him in ways TV never could. He installed a weight rack beside the barn door, turning workouts into chore rotations. Ingrid expanded her meal service to include local sourcing, teaching small groups about sustainable eating. Sometimes a camera crew visited for promotional content, but the footage always surprised producers. Instead of glamour shots, they captured mud boots, laughter, dogs chasing children through the fields. Each frame defied the scripted image network television had painted for years. Whenever he returned to Fox, the farm came with him in spirit. Panel topics still spiraled into heated exchanges, but his remarks carried a new undercurrent: a man who knows the value of quiet, picking his words with deliberate restraint. Colleagues noticed. A few teased him about becoming the philosopher of the lineup. He took it in stride. "When you feed turtles before sunrise," he said once on air, "you get perspective." The segment's clip went viral not because of sarcasm but because its sincerity caught everyone off guard. Beneath the jokes, viewers sensed something larger: evolution. That evolution resonated precisely with his core audience, middle-aged viewers who themselves had lived through multiple reinventions. They saw in him a reflection of midlife recalibration, mistakes acknowledged, lessons integrated, peace redefined. For younger audiences, the curiosity leaned toward relationship goals. An athlete comedian commentator finding balance felt cinematic. The blend of realism and inspiration struck a chord across demographics, something algorithmic marketing couldn't plan. It was proof that authenticity, even in fragments, still translates. Ingrid, meanwhile, became an inadvertent figure of fascination. Fitness publications began asking about her programs, interviews sought her perspective on balancing motherhood, entrepreneurship, and marriage under a magnifying glass. She accepted only a handful but used them wisely. Her recurring theme, transformation, is not a highlight reel, it's an ongoing maintenance plan. She often referenced her own turning points: the day she threw out old clothes after losing the first 50 pounds, the anxiety during her son's diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, the decision to channel fear into education. Those stories humanized her brand and simultaneously reframed the narrative around her husband. Instead of being the wife of a media figure, she became a co-author in the larger story of endurance. And audiences appreciated that contrast, the spectacle of fame counterbalanced by the steadiness of wellness. Through that lens, their fame morphed into credibility instead of spectacle. When she posted behind-the-scenes glimpses of their blended family volunteering or building animal enclosures, comments filled with gratitude rather than gossip. People who once tuned in for controversy now stayed for insight. In a digital culture desensitized to outrage, their household's visible calm became oddly magnetic. It wasn't a retreat from ambition, it was a rebrand of purpose. He often said that media cycles reward noise, but real influence rewards consistency. Together they modeled exactly that: consistency as rebellion. What's striking about their journey is how it circles back to childhood themes: belonging, stability, identity. The boy once shut out because of his skin color now curates a family defined by inclusion. The teenager cast adrift now builds permanence, both in soil and relationships. The man accused and doubted now practices transparency as daily habit. None of it erases the past, yet each habit writes a better sequel. And perhaps that's why fans remain captivated. They're watching an ongoing redemption narrative where penance isn't proclaimed but practiced. Every year brings new chapters. In late 2024, he announced plans for a memoir exploring lessons from sports, media, and fatherhood. True to form, he promised it would focus less on headlines and more on humor as survival strategy. Every punchline is a scar told sideways, the teaser read. The quote spread quickly across platforms, partly melancholic, partly uplifting, exactly his tone. At home, Ingrid edited drafts, highlighting sections that veered too much into self-protection. Let them see the cracks, she advised. That's where the light fits. The phrase stuck. He repeated it in later interviews, crediting her as both inspiration and editor-in-chief of his heart. As 2025 approaches, the Murdochs remain a blend of contrast: TV debates and morning farm chores, public influence and private laughter, strength measured not in decibels but in constancy. Where once he might have defined success by the roar of a studio audience, he now measures it in the silence after tucking children into bed. Ingrid still writes fitness plans, he still argues passionately on air. But beneath every broadcast voice lies the same simple truth they both live by: growth is not about escaping your origins, it's about rewriting what those origins mean. The audience that once tuned in for shock now stays for substance. Each feature, each whispered update, feeds a collective sense that redemption stories aren't just entertainment, they're instruction. By revealing the ordinary, the Murdochs achieved what countless PR teams chase but rarely find: authentic admiration. It's not the kind shouted across social media threads but the kind murmured in support, the quiet approval of people who've stumbled, recovered, and recognized that rhythm in someone else's life. So yes, when the headline flashed "Tyrus from Fox News steps out with his famous wife" and fans are stunned, it described a reaction, not just a moment. Fans were stunned because that image contradicted expectation: the fighter, the pundit, the performer suddenly framed by tenderness, humility, and domestic ease. Yet in hindsight, maybe the real surprise is that we ever expected anything less. After all, a man who spent his life turning chaos into narrative was always destined to find beauty in balance. And a woman who built transformation from discipline was always destined to turn narration into nourishment. Their story continues, sometimes televised, sometimes hidden beneath the ordinary weight of days. But for now, they represent something enduring, proof that notoriety doesn't cancel humanity and that sometimes, stepping out with the right person beside you is the most headline-worthy act of all.